this came from, but I was thinking the other day about Coast to Coast with Art Bell. Did you ever listen to that?
Occasionally.
Okay, all right. I used to work at UPS, like the midnight shift at UPS.
Yeah.
And so I was there until 2, 3 in the morning. And the drive home from the hub I was at was about 25, 30 minutes. And so I listened to this on the way home and just at how bonkers everybody was. But then I think I was thinking that how, what's today's equivalent? Like Alex Jones?
Well, see,
that stuff used to be so quaint and so weird and so kind of funny.
Right.
And now this shit is just so serious.
Well, and Alex Jones, when I was in college, Jones was just a local access Austinite, right? I mean, like he would show up in Linkletter films, but only like in the rotoscoped ones, right? I mean, he'd show up. I think in The Waking Life, he had a bit where he was in, and he was just a guy. Like it wasn't this media conglomerate that it was just a guy ranting into a microphone, and everyone saw it as an Art Bell type of thing. Yeah, it was fun to listen to, and it was fun to make fun of and to imagine what have you. I don't know what. I guess you'd have to find some sort of YouTube rabbit hole at this point, or I don't think it goes out over the airwaves anymore. There's too much money involved, so. Unfortunately,
it's just I think there's probably so many conspiracy theorist paranormal podcasts to choose from that also probably talk about films, but
right.
But I mean, there's just so much.
We're not the only film podcast.
We're not the only film podcast that somehow discusses Art Bell. But I feel like there's so much weird content out there to choose from that
now that everyone has a mic,
it's just got so weird and so. But I feel like everyone takes it so seriously now too. I mean, I used to when I would drive home listening to Art Bell, I would laugh and be like, "You fucking idiots!" Right? I mean, and sorry for any coast to coast
any Art
acolytes
Bell.
out there,
Art
right?
Yeah.
He's not really dead, right? He's
very L. Ron Hubbard-esque. He's just gone to a higher plane.
He's ascended in some way.
We have gone. And I guess maybe this is the evolution of all of these things, right? And not that I've studied this at all, but at some point where you just can't, Pandora's box has been opened and you can't reel it back in. And inevitably, as it spreads farther and farther, the crazier and crazier things are going to get. Where now you're not just on a message board going back and forth with someone who's pretending to be from 20 to 40 and bringing you back information about your time or what have you. Now we've gone to extremes and I don't know if it's a monetization thing. I don't have any idea how QAnon works, to be quite honest. I don't know if there's. I know Alex Jones.
I'm glad that you don't have all the inside information. I feel a lot better about doing this podcast with you now.
Alex Jones is now a snake oil salesman, right? I mean, all of in addition to peddling outlandish Illuminati theories, he's also then hawking. It's and it's so duplicitous and ridiculous, right? Where you can if he was just screaming to the clouds against Illuminati and not accepting and still just a guy in a on a pirate radio station, that'd be one thing. But now when you've got millions upon millions of dollars coming in because you're selling these, multivitamins that are useless to idiotic masses.
Just useless. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you clearly know that's what you're doing. Right. I mean, so there's no honesty in the fact that you don't truly believe, and I guess maybe that's a good thing. I don't know, but it's just like anything else, right? It's just like an evangelistic tent revivalist, right? Where you've got people who aren't really sick and you're curing them. And so to this point, it's just all about the money. Whatever we can bring in, however we can fuck people over.
And speaking of evangelistic, snake oil salesman, Jimmy Swaggart has an uncanny resemblance to my Uncle Danny. And when I was a kid, when I was 8, 7, Sunday morning, Jimmy Swaggart was on, and I was like, "Mom, why is Uncle Danny on TV?" So today we're talking Paul Schrader.
Paul Schrader
is the Schrader Series, the early years.
Why does the Wilhelm scream? Tackling Paul Schrader.
And that includes Blue Collar, Hardcore, and American Gigolo.
Yeah, his first 3 directed films, he would have, like 5 scripts out at this point, like Rolling Thunder, Yakuza, Taxi Driver.
An early draft of the Spielberg Close Encounters. Wait, what year was that?
That would have been 77.
Yeah, so he did an early draft of Close Encounters.
So around that time frame. And
did he get credit for Rolling Thunder?
Yes.
Okay.
At least he talks about it like he does. I mean, in the interviews that they all mention it.
I mean, everyone knows that he did. I just couldn't remember if he actually got like the credit for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. And this is a guy, for those of you who don't know, and obviously Schrader is most well known for his collaborations with Scorsese. He most famously did the script for Taxi Driver. He's done a ton of Scorsese scripts.
Raging Bull,
Last Temptation, Bringing Out the Dead. So he's done work with Martin Scorsese a lot, as well as directed his own things, written things with his brother. This was a guy who grew up in a Calvinist home, wasn't allowed to see movies until he got out on his own after high school.
And his first movie was, did you catch that? Absent-Minded Professor.
Yes, yeah.
He was, what was the quote? He was left unimpressed. I think is the exact quote there.
And so he's an interesting cat. This is a guy who's like clearly was destined to be an artist. He spent some time being a movie critic. He got tied up with Pauline Kael. He was just kind of bouncing around a lot in his life and ended up writing the script for Taxi Driver. And the rest is somewhat history.
Yeah, he was in New York with a friend, and the friend's father was a film critic, and so that's how he ended up at this event with Pauline Kael, and that's how he met her. And he was talking about all these movies, and I guess she was being, he said nice when she sort of admonished his opinions, and when he stood up for Bergman, she was like, "Oh, you're so quaint." But then I guess the story he tells is that he drank too much, stayed there, and in the morning she made him like breakfast and said, "You don't want to be a preacher or a pastor, you want to be a film critic. So, finish up school." And then she helped get him into UCLA film school.
Right. And I think she ended up getting him a gig in Seattle and
tried to.
Oh, she tried to.
So this is where he became a screenwriter. So he'd been working for the Los Angeles Free Press, I think, and she was really good at getting her Paulette's jobs, and she was sort of a king, not a kingmaker, but she would get people in these positions, and it looked good on her, and editors would come to her and say, "Hey, we need somebody," and so she said to him, "There's a gig in Seattle, you should take it. It's an artsy town, you belong there." And he said, "Well, I've kind of got this idea for a screenplay. I think I want to stick in LA and try to do this." And she said, "I need an answer right now." And he's like, "Well, then my answer is no." And she was like, "You're dead to me." And he went back to LA and started the screenwriting.
They probably worked out for the best.
I think so. Although I haven't read any of his criticism. I've read bits and pieces of his book, The Transcendental Style in Film, looking at Ozu and Bresson and Dreyer, I think. So I've read pieces of that, but that's it. And he and Paul, and have you read her review of Hardcore?
I have not. She
did not like Hardcore at all.
Hardcore wasn't well received. We'll get to that. But Hardcore wasn't well received when it came out.
No.
It made money, but it wasn't well received. Right.
But I find it interesting how quickly she sort of just jettisoned people that didn't agree with her or do what she was. I'm spoiler, not a huge Pauline Kael fan. If you couldn't tell by just sort of the things that I was saying. So she was like, "Well, I think you're a good screenwriter, but you suck as a filmmaker." Eventually she came around. She saw his film, The Comfort of Strangers.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah. She saw that and she goes, "Okay, I think you've become a good director now."
Right, you finally crossed that barrier.
But just that sort of, I guess she would badmouth him at studio parties.
It all seems so like New York 70s, just that whole like artiste environment where, you know, everyone's trying to one up one another. But I think that's existed throughout ages, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, the Algonquin Round Table was very much that. But just like Dorothy Parker and Robert Benchley just throwing jabs back and forth at each other as they're just continually getting drunker and drunker. But I think it also has an air of like, I don't know. I mean, faux intellectualism.
I definitely think Pauline Kael had an elevated sense of self of what she was actually doing, right? Whereas, like, you know, I grew up with, and again, I'm not comparing the two, but like Ebert and Siskel always seem to have like a common everyman sensibility to their. They definitely looked at movies as art, and I didn't always agree with their rankings, but Ebert was very much of the sense of, I'm not going to tell you what to like. I'm going to tell you why I like this movie, but I'm never going to tell you what to like. So because I'm not you, I don't know what you're gonna like, what you're not going to like. Pauline Kael was not like that at all. She was like, this film. Yes, this film, no, but yeah, I think I like reading her stuff. As for you can say it out loud.
I don't care for her. I don't care for her style. I don't care. I never understood, I think, her taste or her sensibility. So how I didn't understand how you could like a film like La Ventura and then not like La Note.
Right. And calling Bergman quaint and things like
right.
Okay, yeah.
And like you like masculine and feminine, but then like you would admonish artsy films in other places. And so I could never quite get a grasp on that. And that just pisses me off.
So Blue Collar, let's dig into it. You have one more thought?
Yeah, well,
please, go ahead.
Kind of an overall thought.
Yeah.
And then we can jump into Blue Collar. But something that I find really kind of fascinating about all three of these films is that they are so much more interested, and by films and being interested, I mean the filmmakers, the characters, everyone involved, so much more interested in the illusion than they are the truth. So like in Blue Collar, these guys, this illusion of the American dream, of I can work hard and pay my bills, and that the union will help me and take care of me. Hardcore, right? The illusion that I am a good father. I am a good church member. My daughter didn't run off to go do porn. That's not true. American Gigolo, the illusion of I'm climbing up in society by doing this. I can somehow be part of this world or be accepted in part of this world. I have agency. It's all spectacle. They are just so much more invested in living out that spectacle or living out that illusion than they are in actually seeing what's really going on around them or having this kind of original relationship with the universe around them.
I mean, I think that drives from an 18-year-old kid losing his Calvinist faith, right?
Sure.
Realizing, and so going into hardcore, and like I wasn't a huge, I mean, not a huge, it sounds like a weird way to say that, but I wasn't a huge hardcore Calvinist fan. Like I wasn't a huge Calvinist. I wasn't like really kind of in tune with those dudes, right? Yeah. But listening to the tenets and kind of reading up just a little bit on just very surface level of the Calvinistic tenets, and it's outlined in hardcore as well. But like coming from that perspective and thinking that you're going into the ministry and then having your kind of worldview turned on its head, all three of these films speak to a young person who clearly has artistic tendencies, has a voice, who's struggling with losing his faith in whatever sense that may be. And again, like you said, in Blue Collar, it's losing their faith in the American dream. Even if it wasn't ever there, and our hardcore is actually losing his faith, and then, or at least losing his faith in the edifice of his, the artifice of his family, right? And then in American Gigolo, this idea of like, I'm a lower class citizen, I can actually live in this and be respected by these elites that I'm pleasuring
in servicing,
right?
Yeah,
that's a good term. You do a good job of this. I'm going to try to do better. So if you mind, I'll take the synopsis of Blue Collar, and I'll give you the other two. So Blue Collar, his first film is about 3 Detroit auto workers. They're all basically just day-to-day union guys that work in a plant, and they're all put upon in different ways. There's 2 black guys, 1 white guy, Harvey Keitel, Richard Pryor, and Yaphet Kotto. Yaphet Kotto is an ex-con. Richard Pryor is a family man, as well as Harvey Keitel is another family man. They work hard, they try to play hard, but they have the typical trappings of a 1970s family life where they're probably the only caretakers for their families. They have too many kids and not enough money. They eventually get the idea that they're getting screwed over from both ends. They're getting screwed over by the plant. They're getting screwed over by their union. So they decide one night that they're gonna rob their union headquarters. It all goes south. They try to rob it. When they actually do end up making the robbery, but the robbery is not as prolific as they think it's going to be. They only take home $600. They owe more money to the guy who set them up on the robbery than they actually took in. They come across a book that the union heads are keeping that has outlined some illicit loans that they've been making. The group has been approached by the FBI earlier in the film. And so Richard Pryor gets the idea that they're going to blackmail the union. And then from there, really everything turns south. And one of them ends up getting murdered in a quote unquote accident. And Richard Pryor and Harvey Keitel eventually turn against one another. So that is the basis for Blue Collar. What are your thoughts?
Well, I love. I don't know if did you grow up around union guys? Is Texas a union place? So I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Indianapolis, and I mean there were some auto parts. There was Allison transmission. There was,
I mostly oil and cattlemen. I don't know if there were a whole lot of union for Texas riggers and things like that. I really don't know. It never came across my family. So we weren't ever talked about it. And of course, being in a conservative South, unions are always just kind of talked about negatively. It was never really, but you never really heard about it. You never really heard about guys going to union meetings. You never heard about, paying their dues or anything or running for office or anything like that around, at least not in my, my youth anyway.
Yeah. I wasn't, and my family wasn't necessarily, part of this group. They weren't union guys. My dad was a businessman in the printing industry. But I had friends whose parents were electricians, who were, pipe fitters and other union types. And the area of town we grew up in was pretty blue collar. And so, I mean, this is a familiar, kind of environment, right? And these guys, they work hard, they work until the whistle, and then they go straight to the bar that's basically across the parking lot. And I just love that. What I really like is that this film gives us kind of a picture of a specific place, right, in a specific time, and especially like a specific time in America when I don't know my union history all that well, but see, at this point, I mean, unions were weakening and they would get kind of weaker as we go forward. And so you start to see more and more corruption because of that. But that bar is like any kind of working blue collar bar. So that felt really real and familiar. And then these guys, again, they're a little more than archetypes. I don't think that they are your kind of standard. I think they are types of these characters, but they have their own sort of set of problems and fit in these categories. Yaphet Kotto's character wants nice things, right? He's single, he's a bachelor. Yeah, he's an ex-con, but he wants to be able to afford like his car, his women, right? His cocaine.
Right.
right. And then Zeke, Richard Pryor, has 12 kids. Or no, he says he has 12 kids to the IRS, right. But he only has 3. And so when the tax man comes to do a kind of like on-the-spot audit, they go get the neighbor's kids and switch clothes and bring them in. And then Keitel has to work a second job, right, to make ends meet. Has to work a second job to pay for his daughter's braces, right, her orthodonture. But I mean, as far as plot, there's not a whole lot of plot. And this is what I love about like Schrader's films too, is that he's much more moody and kind of like they're almost like little scenes here and there rather than having this bigger like narrative arc.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The story is just these workaday guys, and really just talking about the lower classes. Not to be denigrating at all. You wouldn't figure these. I wouldn't call these guys even lower middle class. These are just these are 9 to 5. Well, probably work harder than that. But they're hourly guys that have to give up most of their wages to their union dues, and also then whatever they have left over goes directly to the bar across the street. Yeah. That's really and they're trying to find pleasure wherever they can, but these are all broken men but they've done everything that they've done everything they're supposed to do their entire lives, right? And they're stuck here with these, they're loving fathers. They're not they're not bad family men. You can argue, right? But they're really, they party and they have dalliances with other women. To that point, we can put a pin in that particular piece of it. But also, they really are just guys that are trying to provide for their family and trying to get 1 foot ahead of the next paycheck, and they can't possibly do it. There's the scenes you talked about. Yaphet Kotto obviously seems like the more world-wise version of all of them, and he clearly has a little bit more. The ability to not, he doesn't have quite as many stressors that Pryor and Keitel do. There's a scene in the movie where Keitel comes home, and these are single income families most likely, and he can't afford orthodontia for his daughter, and so she's gone and put paper clips in her mouth, and she comes home and her mouth is just completely bloodied, and it's this heartbreaking thing where Keitel's like, I can't. He doesn't overreact. He is just kind of broken by it, and it's like, fine, we'll pay for it. We'll figure it out. The taxman scene with Pryor, which is one of the scenes actually Schrader said he would, if he was rewriting it today, he'd take that out. I think mainly because it probably just looks. It looks like Pryor is trying to trick or trying to break the law in a way that, and I don't necessarily. I think Schrader's maybe being a little overly harsh on that, on the reading of that, because it gives Pryor really, I think, and he's outstanding in this movie, but he gives him one of his best, lines. And he was like, what, if I had an army and a fucking navy, I'd be a badass motherfucker too. Like, and he's talking about how, like, the taxman comes and he says, you've got, you only have 3 kids and you said you had 6. And he's like, well, I didn't have all my kids in a hospitol, and the neighbors happen to come over at the same time, and they like change clothes and bring them all out. And the guy's like, look, man, these kids don't even know, who they are. They don't have names. Like, these aren't your kids. And Pryor just goes off and is like, I got $30 left every paycheck. And that's it, man. What am I supposed to fucking do here? And you're going to charge me $2,000 on top of, on penalties? Like, I got nothing. And like, he just breaks in that moment. And yeah, Schrader showing this view into, people who are busting their ass to just make it day to day. And of course, yeah, you can also then point to, well, they do blow and they drink and they're sneaking out on their wives but these guys at the end of the day are no different than anyone else, other than they've got, they just didn't get the breaks, and like I said, and they're getting it from both sides. I think what's one of the things that's so interesting too, when you meet when you meet these guys, they're pretty jovial at the beginning of it. They're in the bar, they're having a good time. Richard Pryor's giving Yaphet Kotto a hard time about a great line about how if these women are leaving with him in the bar, and he's like, well, you better leave your fingerprints because he's going to eat up everything else. It's just a great, and I would imagine like all of that was, some of it may have been on the paper, but I guarantee you most of that was Pryor improvising. So again, when you see them starting to complain and starting to push back against their union, they're complaining about little things. It's almost one of those things you can see it in the union boss's faces. There's like Pryor's complaining about his locker being broken and how it's been broken for 6 months. So it's these little indignities that start to add up. There's a guy that also works with them who's trying to get a cold drink, and the drink machine constantly, stiffs him, doesn't give him his beverage, and eventually he takes a forklift and drives it into the machine,
which is brilliant. I mean, and this is, I think, where Schrader does such a good job of showing that it's not any one big thing that causes us to break, that causes us to go into revolt or to push back against the powers that be. It's these tiny things. It's the cliche of a death by 1,000 paper cuts, right? Pryor is screaming about his locker, and he's like, "Look at my pinky, man! I have to use my pinky to open up this locker, and I cut my pinky." It's the scene with Keitel in the braces. It's that, and I know that seems bigger, right? But it's just finally that one last thing. He's like, "Okay, we'll do it. I'll find a way to pay for it. We'll do it." These guys, they have fully bought in to the lie that we've all been told, that if you work hard, you'll be okay. Right. And they're like, but I'm not. Right. But I'm not. And I think the scene with the tax man is really one scene that connects to, our current world. The IRS says, not to get too political and too Marxist here, like on one point, but the IRS is like,
okay, comrade.
I know. I'm sorry. But the IRS, people from the IRS have said, we're not going after rich people for not paying their taxes because they can afford to hire lawyers to get out of it. We're going to go after the people who can't afford that. And that's exactly what's happening in that scene. Right? We know that people that make a ton of money don't pay as much taxes, relatively speaking, as people in the middle class. And that is what Schrader is showing in that moment with Pryor, going, "What the fuck do you want me to do? I'm trying to get ahead, and I'm trying to use every loophole I can to have more money on the table for this family."
And they're pawns in the game on three different sides. So they're pawns in the game for the union, where they pay up, and these guys have union leaders have cushy jobs and really do nothing other than take the money and then loan it out on top of it, and really do not help the workers at all. They're getting screwed by the plant. The plant's up their ass the entire time and it's always hounding them about doing jobs faster, doing something longer. And then they've got this FBI agent who wants them to come in and turn and rat out the union, and these guys don't have anywhere to turn. So it's no question. It's them coming to the conclusion that let's rob the union, let's rob the office, and at least and what's crazy about the robbery is that they're only going to get $6,000, which or something along those lines. It's a very small amount.
I think it was 10, wasn't it?
Well, 10 was what they said that they lost, but I think ultimately I don't think it was actually going to be in there. So when the robbery happens, they don't actually steal anything because the money wasn't actually there.
It's just petty cash that they got.
But the union claims to the press that they stole $10,000 to $20,000 because the insurance would come back at them. But the guy that they had the job, the guy that turned them on to the ability to rob the union, he wanted 10% and $1,000 on top. So clearly they didn't even get that amount of money.
They didn't get enough to
and
pay
so these
for
guys
them.
this was just another, a few months worth of, this was a rent check for these guys. This was dentistry. This was not going to set these guys up for life. They were going to still have to go back into the work every single day, the plant every single day, and still work this out. This was just going to get them over the hump for a very and you also, these guys know that this money, as soon as they steal it, it's going to be gone. Richard Pryor says as much. He has to pay the IRS. Keitel has to pay for dentistry, and one of the brief moments, this makes this movie sound like it's so heavy. It's really not, though. There's a lot of back and forth. The camaraderie between the three men on camera was great. Off camera, not so much. Was terrible. Right. But when they actually commit the robbery and they go to the Halloween store to get
it's so funny.
It's just so comical. One of them gets googly eye glasses with the springs coming out. They're not. Richard Pryor has buck teeth. They're not disguised at all.
Harvey Keitel has the arrow through his head, the Steve Martin arrow through his head. And when the security guard, the old Belming security guard, when they ask him to identify when he's in the hospital and the cop's like, what do they look like? and he goes, one guy had an arrow through his head. But it's so ridiculous. But it's so jovial and so, but it's also played really deadpan.
Right.
Which makes it work so much better, I think, too.
Yes. Yeah. There's no musical cue that makes it kind of wacky. You're just staring at these guys going, these guys can't win ever.
And I loved it. So Pryor buys the disguises, but we don't see what he buys. He's at the toy store with his kid, and they're there together, and he's putting stuff in the bag. And so we don't know until that happens that that's what he bought for disguises. And I thought that was funny and brilliant, but also like really well done on Schrader's part to not play it too heavy, but then not give it away.
And so the robbery goes south. Richard Pryor decides to hold on to this book, this ledger that has a list of loans in it, thinking that he can get one up on the union and potentially blackmail them for the money that they owe, the person who set up the job. And really none of that works out at all. Essentially, because it was two black men and a white guy and they've been known to hang out together, everyone basically knew who it was. At least the union knew who it was. They start to put the screws to the guys. Yaphet Kotto is in a spray painting area of the plant, and he gets stuck in there and then gets suffocated by the spray paint. So they know that they've murdered him.
And before that, Kotto heard two guys in a bar in the local bar.
That's right.
Calling Keitel's family or wife and saying, hey, you need to, or is Mr. I forget what his last name was. Jerry's last name was, but hey, is your husband there? Oh no, okay. Well, this is the phone company. Do you have any problems or anything? And so they're going to go over there to attack her. Kotto hears this, calls her, says, yeah, Jerry ripped his pants at the gas station. He needs you to bring him another pair. And so he's there waiting. And this, I think, is another good scene of Kotto's the bachelor in this, but he's also, in a way, the protector of everyone. He's the big guy. He's the muscle. So he goes over there and sits in their house and waits for these guys to come in and just beats the shit out of them with a baseball bat.
And he's also the one the mob targeted first because of that, because he has no ties, right? There's no one going to investigate this guy.
And he's an ex-con, so no one cares.
Ex-con who deals in prostitutes and drugs,
cocaine,
right? Yeah, so
and loan sharks, and so
right. So this guy, and he's the one who knew to set up the job. So the mob clearly picks him because he'll be missed at least. Pryor goes to the union heads to kind of try to play a hand. He plays it to where he gets the job of the
shop steward.
The shop steward, which he had hinted at earlier in the movie that he was wanting to run for that.
Oh, it's actually the union rep, right?
Right. Yes, you're right. The shop steward was the one that works for the plant.
Right.
Yeah. So he gets the union rep at the plant, and it's really kind of there's a scene between him and Keitel once Keitel realizes that Pryor has kind of sold out their group and basically sold out Keitel for sure, and taken this cushy job that's worth $17,400 a year and kind of set himself up where the union rep, they tell Pryor, look, this is just how it's going to be. And if it wasn't for us, and their history of us, black guys like you wouldn't even be working in the plant. So you need to figure out that this is your best opportunity to be here. And Pryor goes to Keitel and like, look, if I'm going to have to kiss ass, I'm going to choose the asses who I kiss, and I'm going to do it on my own terms.
But this is how hegemonic institutions stay in power, right? I mean, this is exactly, they make it seem normal. They make it seem, look, they tell Richard Pryor, this is how it's done. This is how it's always been done.
Right.
So just go along with it. And it's like, oh, okay, this is really fucked up. But yeah, it's normal. So, okay, cool. I get the job now. And that's what Keitel says. Like, they killed Smokey. They killed Yaphet Kotto.
Right.
And he's just like, look, man, I got to feed my family. And that's it. And that's how they fool this guy. That's how they force him to kind of keep up with the everyday appearances of this is just how it goes.
And so Keitel,
it's always been that way.
Yeah, and so Keitel turns immediately to the FBI to play his hand as well, because that's all he has left at this point. And at that point, the really interesting thing that I think that happens at the end is how their friendship then devolves into racial slurs and just name calling, but it's brutal. It is, and how Pryor is accusing Keitel of being a turncoat and of being a rat, and Keitel is basically, saying the same thing about Pryor and how he sold out Smokey. And then it comes to this head where at the end, the movie ends with both of them picking up basically pipe wrenches and about to, and the movie freeze frames with a voiceover about how everyone gets, how they play everybody against one another.
In this beautiful scene where they're all hooking up with hookers and doing coke, they have these really kind of sincere, deep conversations. Keitel's character starts talking about how I'm not going to work there forever. I'm going to find something else. I'm going to do something else. And then he says, I always say this when I'm coked up. As this defeatist, I know that I'm full of shit.
Right.
I know that it doesn't matter. And Pryor has a similar kind of conversation.
I've never been good with money. And then
Smokey gives this kind of speech of this is what they do. This is how they sort of turn us all against each other. Right? And then that's the voiceover that comes back at the end, right? This disembodied Yaphet Kotto voice of saying this is what happens. This is how it happens.
For Schrader to be, these three films do feel like he is at the forefront of saying a lot of things that would then be followed on and said later on in movies that I think he kind of touches on at the very beginning. And we'll talk, I have a little bit of notes when we talk about American Gigolo for sure.
Yeah.
But this comes out a year before Norma Rae, and Norma Rae wins the Oscar. This was one of those movies that I think it didn't get a lot of fanfare. Pryor is still known as a comedian. I mean, obviously, this is really his only, he had done some dramatic kind of blaxploitation roles before this, but this was his first and really his only dramatic role that he does, and especially moving on from this. And this movie is billed as a Which Way Is Up kind of Richard Pryor kind of, and so it doesn't do well. The advertising is completely off for it. The message gets kind of squashed, and this is a movie that doesn't really get talked about a lot, but it really was one of these first messages as we're coming out of Vietnam and these movies that are coming out of this era where the American dream is not for everybody. It doesn't exist for everybody. And it's also done on the backs of these guys that you just ignore. And this movie is, I don't know, to me, this should be a more heralded film than what it is, especially for the performances of the three leads, which again, the fact that Pryor wasn't nominated for an Oscar for this is, and again, I understand why, right? But this would have been a role that should have launched him. And again, I know he got into cocaine with this, and he was in a bad place at this point.
It was probably before this too that he was into cocaine.
For sure.
I think Schrader got into cocaine.
But this should have launched him into a career that wouldn't have led to The Toy or, Hear No Evil, See No Evil. Those types of things where it was just he kind of got pigeonholed back into this fast-talking, vulgar, comedic presence, which those movies, fine. But he had something to offer here that really could have taken him to a level where he'd be way more revered and way more known. And again, it's not like Pryor is lacking for
who's this Richard Pryor guy that you speak of? I don't think I've
known for dramatic acting and known for another one of his amazing talents here.
Well, I mean, think of someone like Adam Sandler.
Sure. Or Robin Williams.
Or Robin Williams.
Right.
Sure. I'm just thinking of these comedic actors that we've seen turn in really incredible dramatic performances, more than one. And, with Pryor here, it's really, we're talking about this one and not all these other great dramatic roles that he had. That's
right. And to this one, bringing to the table, what Robin Williams can do comedically, but what Pryor brought to the table here was improvisation in a dramatic sense that brought gravitas to a scene, not where he's cutting up and making other people laugh, right? He's bringing stuff to this role. There are moments where he does that, but there's moments when he's standing up and talking about, I know what plant is short for. It's short for plantation, and flick my bick, motherfucker, and all these things that that are just so good, and you just know that was Pryor in the moment, bringing all the anger and all of the passion, to this role.
Yeah, he was so. I mean, they were all so good, but he's the standout. But I also like that this film is not it's not a didactic film. Again, it's not this thing that stands up and says, here is my big message. It lets that message play out. And I think that is something that we see in like across Schrader, where he just kind of lets
for a guy who comes from a Calvinist background, he does not preach at you at all.
Right. He just sort of lets it sit there, and then you take what you want from it. And this is... Okay, I'm going to jump into Pickpocket for 1 second.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
Because I think this is something that he takes from Bresson and from Pickpocket especially, because there is no emotion in Pickpocket. There is no feeling from the actors. Everything is so flat. Everything is so matter of fact, because Bresson wanted us, right, as viewers, to bring our shit to that film and then make meaning that way. Maybe Bresson's like an early pioneer of reader response theory, right? But he wanted us to sort of complete that meaning, that Duchampian sense of the viewer finishes the work. And I think while Blue Collar isn't as strong in that way as Schrader's future films, there is a sense of that where he's just like, this is just a slice of life, right? And then we get that message from watching everything play out.
Yeah, I think with Blue Collar, he definitely wanted to get the message across, what he was trying to get across. I mean, because the last scene is supposed to invoke a socialist painting where, you got the kind of each other's throats, kind of. Yeah. And it does a good job of that. It's a little bit, like, I think it could have just been slightly tighter, but I
mean, it's definitely a first film.
Sure,
right?
For sure.
Yeah. So, I of course, I agree. But yeah, I mean, I think he's sort of onto something and showing something at that point.
Oh, absolutely. Just last notes. One of my favorite like tropes in movies that never gets talked about is whenever you see somebody at a kitchen table with bills, that's always a bad thing. It's always a bad thing. That person does not have enough money to pay bills.
Let me ask, have you ever done that?
No.
Okay.
No, but I love those scenes so much. I love to see a kitchen table just strewn with bills.
With bills and like calculators and pencils and like just the look of worry on someone's face. I have
the guy with the old calculator that just runs through the paper. Yes.
What do I do with this? It's just like up all night. It's like
I've run the numbers 3 times. Janet, we're not gonna be able to make this month. And we'll talk about this in hardcore as well. And I know we talked about this offline, but Schrader's T-shirt game is on fucking point.
Oh my God, I know.
So the thing that I did not know, and we talked about this earlier, but Dizzy Gillespie had a run for president in 1964 with this amazing cabinet. I didn't even write it all down, but like Malcolm X and like there was just a huge, wonderful.
And Charles Mingus would have been Secretary of Peace, and I'm like, man, can you imagine that administration? That would have been so
cool. Smokey wears a Dizzy Gillespie for President shirt, just in a brief scene where he's in kind of a montage working scene. Yeah. And then Harvey Keitel wears this great 2 all-beef patty, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, Big Mac shirt when he's at home one night. And this will carry over into hardcore as well. But just last trailing thoughts about Blue Collar. Ed Begley Jr. is great in this in his very small early role. Tracy Walter, who is great in this in kind of an uncredited role. Tracy Walter, if you look him up on IMDb, you'll recognize him. He was a character actor, most notably he was
the FBI agent, wasn't he?
No. That was he was just a random user. He was a random union guy, kind of talking in the background in one of the cafeteria scenes. He's the guy. He was like a henchman in Tim Burton's Batman. He kind of just shows up in those types of roles, kind of a long haired.
Oh guy. No, he was the number one guy. Right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well,
yes.
He's also in hardcore.
Yes, he's also in hardcore. So Ed Begley and
Cliff DeYoung was who I was thinking.
Yes, Cliff DeYoung was the FBI
agent guy.
Both Ed Begley and Tracy Walter are in hardcore as well.
Yeah. So I was going to say like kudos for Schrader for like really launching Ed Begley Jr.
Yeah. So go see Blue Collar. It's not streaming anywhere, but you can pick it up on Blu-ray and
which you should
on Amazon. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so hardcore.
Do hardcore?
Absolutely. Yeah. George C. Scott plays a Calvinist. He's just a Calvinist. He's a businessman, a Calvinist, and he lives this kind of very pious lifestyle. He's during Christmas time one year, his daughter, who's in high school, is going on a field trip with the church. They're going to Knott's Berry Farm, and unfortunately, on the trip, she does not come back. and he hires a private detective, Peter Boyle, to help him find her. And what he finds is not what he wanted to find. Peter Boyle comes across an 8mm stag film and shows it to George C. Scott, and then they kind of dive into seedy. Is it California? It's California, right? So it's LA. So it's LA underground porn scene.
Later they go to San Diego and San Francisco.
And so George C. Scott kind of dives into this underground porn scene in Los Angeles and tries to find his daughter. So he keeps going from pornographer to pornographer. He connects with girls who are in the pornography business, and ultimately he ends up finding his daughter. She wasn't kidnapped. She had actually run away. We find out that George C. Scott's wife has left him at some point, and that he thought he was being a good dad, but clearly his strict upbringing, he wasn't listening to his daughter. She didn't believe that she was loved. And so we dive deep into the hardcore porn scene of the late 70s, early 80s, and watch George C. Scott kind of descend into, this seedy underbelly, but also this world that he had thought himself better than and really kind of paid no attention to. He had lived in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is where Paul Schrader was actually from. And so this was a Midwestern man who went out to California and then found the real world. And it's
a real world.
Yeah, a real world. And it's an interesting movie. Scott's really good in it. It kind of has its cake and eats it too a little bit, where it shows this pornography world as something that is dangerous and detrimental, but then also peppers itself with a ton of nudity, a ton of really close kind of softcore scenes for a major mainstream film. But yeah, what do you think of hardcore?
So one of the things that I liked about hardcore is this is where I think Schrader really starts to, if not find his voice, discover what he wants his voice to be. And so part of the kind of flat, effectless style that was in Pickpocket shows up here. Because I don't think that George C. Scott, other than when he's fighting, really shows anything. It's just kind of a blank slate, a very matter-of-fact approach.
Yeah, you see him hide his face a few times when he's watching pornography, and when he's watching specifically hard scenes to watch. There's one where he's watching a really violent porn, and then the first time he sees his daughter on screen and she's with two men, he's clearly broken up by this. But you don't see a major violent outburst or a major breakdown from him. He takes it all very matter of fact. Even when he's dealing with Peter Boyle, he gets a little upset with Peter Boyle because he's with another. When he finds him, he's with another young woman. But that seems to be the thing that upsets him the most, is that he's using his money and not trying to find his daughter, but having dalliances with the young prostitutes.
Right. But I like that because it sort of lets us stand in for him, or really, I think, allow our emotions to go into that place rather than having to be sort of told by this character how we should feel about this. Because I do wonder about the way Schrader looks at porn in this film as only sort of detrimental, only dangerous. It feels very much like he wanted to explore porn more, but also was still like keeping arm's length. We understand that the daughter goes off to do porn because she felt accepted there. I mean, she felt love there. But we also get the sense from Schrader that it was because she didn't get affection or love at home, and that's why people go do this. So it was a weird kind of like a weird, I don't know, semi-message in there that I don't necessarily think he intended, but it just comes off in a strange way.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it is an interesting target for him in this sense. And I think it's mainly because potentially to him it was so foreign at the particular point. You enter the film and it's all adults talking about Calvinist things, right? You see a young boy at a kitchen table watching adults talk about religion. And then you see a bunch of kids, a ton of kids in another room watching some ridiculous Christmas show, and then another adult getting upset by that Christmas show that seemingly is innocuous. They're just dancing on TV. And he's like, oh, this crap. I can't, we should just, I don't even know why we have a TV. But the kids are never spoken to. They're never really even acknowledged. Their desires aren't acknowledged. You see the daughter, and George C. Scott provides affection to her when she's getting on the bus. But the real true telling scene is when she's with her friend, and her friend's like, well, I was with the boy and he's doing this, I forget what the whole thing is, but he's drawing his finger around her breast.
Closer and
closer. And you have to tell him to stop. And it's this very kind of innocent teenage adolescent, even though they're probably a little too old to
be playing games like that,
right? And it's an interesting kind of telling scene where you can interpret it after you've seen the movie, of like where the daughter's like, maybe she's seeing that as a little bit childish, and she sees the first opportunity that she gets to be out from under the thumb of her father and the church, and getting to California and going to and again they're going to Knott's Berry Farm, but now she's in this area where she can be on her own for a while, and she takes the opportunity to run away. And so, yeah, I agree with that porn is an interesting, probably an easy target here. I think he could have very easily also gone with prostitution, but I think Schrader maybe plays it a little bit, pulls it back, because I don't think if he had gone the prostitution route, you can clearly see that would have been too far. But pornography in this case, where if she's a willing participant and she's of age, there's really no harm in this. Yes, it's seen as seedy just because of the avenues in which it's shown and the places he has to go. But in reality, like most of the people that he meets, they're all decent people. I mean, Boyle's a scumbag, but he's a private detective, right? He's
a bigger scumbag than Nikki, who the sex worker that he ends up, I wouldn't say hiring, but kind of coercing and hiring, because he ends up paying her, right, to help him find his daughter. I mean, she has this speech to him that's kind of like, do you think you're better? You're no different than me. Right? I mean, right. We think about sex in a different way, but it's also the same way, right? We both have this same idea of sex, right?
that the scene where he's explaining Tulip and the Calvin tenets, and about the idea that they're predestined to be saved, and it doesn't matter what they do, and they've already been chosen. That whole scene and her understanding of it is just really, really well done, by Schrader. I think, and that's of it all. I read some reviews about this and how the relationship between George C. Scott and what was her name? I'm sorry, was it Sunny? Was it
Nikki? Nikki was the character. Season Hubley.
Yes. Yes. So between him and Nikki was unresolved, but I think that was the point. I think I think Scott is not supposed to come off as redeemed at the end of this movie. He does reconnect with his daughter. He does tell her that he wants her to come home, and then she eventually comes home with him. But he completely throws away his relationship with Nikki, and Nikki, who's someone who's desperately looking for a father figure, in the sense of someone who's who wants to be and is trying to help him, is trying to befriend him, and he leaves her at the end of the film without even barely a nod, and leaves her in a town that she's not familiar with. He's brought her there, and then the movie ends. And that whole portion of it is, I think, an indictment of what of what Schrader was trying to portray in the entire is that none of these things are better than one another. That they're all just trying to survive. They're all just trying to find love. They're all just trying to find salvation in some sense, and that they're all equally bankrupt and and ultimately empty at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And again, I mean, George C. Scott's, or Jake Van Doren is the character's name. His reliance on, and then falling back into that illusion, that idea of spectacle of who he thinks he is. He didn't learn anything. I mean, I'd be really interested to see what happens after they get home. How is he going to treat his daughter differently? well, how's that community going to react or be any different? I mean, there is no real redemption there, at least in my eyes. And I think Schrader going for this sort of like transcendental sort of thing in film of how like these sort of basic mundane things can lead to sort of like a spiritual awakening or spiritual recognition or a transcendence into something else. I don't think it happens in this film. I don't know if he intended it to happen, but this is trying for more of a redemption ending than Blue Collar for sure. And I just think Scott ends up as the same person. Maybe he realizes, oh wait, I am kind of an asshole, right? When he looks at Nikki at the end, is like, and she's like, well, whatever, just walks away.
Right.
And then Peter Boyle's like, just leave her. She belongs here. I mean, so there is no.
Yeah, that line was pretty crushing as well.
That was tough.
I think at the end of this, Scott goes back to the resignation that he probably puts the screws to his daughter even more so now. He probably pays closer attention, but is then driven more to keep tabs on her because he has nothing else really. He has this business which is what allows him. I mean, but again, he's so myopic on the colors of the billboards.
What color is this blue?
Than he is actually anything else in his life, and yeah, it's. And like you said, he's learned nothing, and he's also like he has ingratiated himself into this environment. He's put on the affectations of him in a garish silk shirt.
Yeah, because he played porn producer.
Right. So he had at one point he's trying to find the actor who acted with his daughter in the 8mm film. So he sets up this fake audition in a hotel room, and he puts on a wig and this tight T-shirt and a mustache, and he looks ridiculous.
It's so good.
It's awesome because it really does just put a wonderful face to it all, and he just looks so silly throughout. And when he starts to go through, and he does start to wear these tight pants and silk shirts and open shirts with chains, and he starts to try to finance fake finance films. He tries to get himself through in different adult bookstores and things like that. That whole piece of it is it's great. George C. Scott like putting that whole image of George C. Scott on its ear.
It's so good. Going back to how Schrader looks at porn, I know this was 1979. We think about, I think, pornography and sex work in a much different way now, where we think of sex work as actual work. And I don't think Schrader and many people probably around Schrader thought of porn as work or as a respectable kind of work. And even Nikki, right? I mean, she's a character who's doing all these kind of side hustles in the porn industry to make ends meet. And at one point was strung out, right? And has to she's trying to get away from her pimp, right? This guy that kind of controls her. But I think it would have been interesting, or it would be interesting if Schrader made that film now and how he would look at porn or the sex work industry and how he would incorporate maybe the idea further of agency of some of these women, like of the daughter who runs away. She's like, no, this is just what I want to do. Right? I mean,
right.
This is what I find interesting and what I find compelling and what I want to pursue.
Yeah. The flip side of this movie is a movie that I would like to see. To see this told from his daughter's perspective, rather than a Calvinist who's losing his faith and having to
white middle-aged man, right. Straight man,
which in 1979 plays a lot better than what it would today, because we don't give a shit about that guy anymore.
Nor should we. I mean,
right? No, because his story's been told. We get it. It's been told. This has clear parallels to Taxi Driver, right? Where, I mean, Bickle is in a different type of stasis than Scott is, but Bickle has kind of isolated himself in this taxi cab, and he looks at everything from afar, and he sees the world as this ugly place, and he keeps himself in a very tiny apartment. He has these ridiculous ideals, but then even then he dabbles in pornography and what worldlyism, worldly things, and Scott Van Dorn here has done the same thing. It's just in a different manner. He's wrapped himself in the Bible and his community, and doesn't even care to engage in what's beyond the walls. Again, just by the evidence of like, well, why do we even have a TV in here? And he's seen as like the more progressive one because he's like, don't worry about it. It's just Christmas. Just give him, let him watch it. It's Christmas time. Like, so he's seen like he's the more, loose and friendly guy, but ultimately like, yeah. And he never allows himself, like even when he's talking about Calvinism, and he's not trying to, his whole idea of predestination negates the idea of even trying to convert her. She's clearly lost. Nikki's clearly lost. Why? She is a tool, an ends to a mean, and he does not give a shit about her. There's no fatherly, and so you have to imagine that's exactly how he treated his daughter. It doesn't matter what you do. We're already predestined to go to heaven. Fuck this life. Like, it doesn't matter. Get through it. Do what you're told to do, live a pious life, and then your reward will be someplace else. Why do I have to love you now? Right. Which is why you can, again, the interesting flip side of this is his wife's story and his daughter's story.
Yeah, because we don't find out until later when Nikki confronts him. She's like, your wife didn't really die. And I just love that. Like, where she's just like, your wife isn't dead. And he's like, no. She's like, yeah, I can see why she left you. Right. Which also begs the question of why did she leave the daughter behind? I mean, right. I know. I mean,
and there could have been a ton of.
Yeah. I'm not. Yeah. I mean, that was not to accuse Van Dorn's ex-wife of being a bad mother. I just thought about like, wait, why did she leave the daughter? I mean, she had to know that this guy.
And we don't necessarily know that she left the daughter. She could still be in Grand River. I mean, like, yeah. So I get your point.
Right. One of the things I really like about, and this, I mean, I kind of said this earlier, but Schrader just gives us an occasion for story, and then just like lets it go. Right? I mean, there's no real like narrative structure here in terms of plot. It's just like the plot is guy's going to find his daughter, and like that's it. And then he just kind of lets the mood and the kind of air in the room sort of take over. I think in a lot of these scenes.
Yeah, Boyle is the most like animated character out of all of them. He's kind of the one that's leading us through the different environments, right? Yeah. Even though he's not that big of a presence, and man is in desperate need of a comb, but like but he's so wonderful. Like Boyle's career is so, like I said, it has its ups and downs. I want to talk about it a little bit later. Oh, okay. It's just in passing, not too much detail. But I think he's really good in this movie, and he's the only one that really kind of brings an emotional aspect to this because he's seen as the slimier version of any of these characters, right? He seems like he's the id, right? He goes out and he sits down and watches the porn shoot being he watches the pornography.
Well, he even recognizes one of the. He's like, hey, is that? Right. And the producer's like, yeah, come have a seat.
And he's having sex with young women. He's chubby and just gangly and unkempt and grotesque in a lot of ways. And it's this idea that he's the one who's more knowing of everybody's environment. He knows how to navigate Grand Rapids, Michigan. He knows how to navigate California. He shows up in places where why is he there? But just to move the story along. And it does, and like it's never intrusive. It's never like, oh, why? I mean, you just accept it. That character, he doesn't belong in this movie. No. Or any sort of Bresson movie for sure. But but yeah, he's great.
Because his eyes just are nonstop the entire time. I mean, they're wide and they're looking around and they're just squirrely because he's just squirrely. But no, he's fantastic. It was weird. He was like a weird character in that film, and I didn't quite get it, but I loved it.
Yeah. I do think it'd be interesting to see how this would be made today. I don't know, because again, what's your big bad? Is it sex trafficking at this point? But again, that removes the agency of the daughter. So this wasn't something she chose to be in pornography. You're clearly not going to be choosing to be. I mean, it could be prostitution, but again, you'd have to give her something that was shocking, but then also.
But I think the shocking thing would be someone's father trying to get them out of this. I mean, what if she's an OnlyFans, cam girl or whatever? And I mean, right. I mean, and obviously some parents are going to have problems with that. And it's this guy, in his like late night trolling somehow like comes across her on Pornhub or so. I don't know. So, but I just wonder if there has to be like a big,
right. Do you think so? What's your take on the nudity aspect of this movie and the pornography aspect, and kind of showing this what could be considered gratuitous sex scenes in a movie that's trying to portray the movie as a bad? Do you think that he's trying to do both of those? That is intent.
I think that's my kind of question: is what is he trying to do with that? Because I think he's clearly interested on more than a good or bad level. I think that you can be. I think someone like Schrader can go, okay, I don't understand this. Let me find out. I'm curious. Let me find out. But I think he sort of hedges his bets in this film, where it's never sort of fully bad and it's never sort of fully exploratory or like, okay, I accept this as a filmmaker for what it is. Right? Even though he was like shooting and filming in these actual places. He was going to bookstores, going to these theaters and filming there. I think for a movie about porn, you have to show it. You have to, and I think we'll talk about this too in American Gigolo, but I think that you have to, and if we're sitting down to watch a film about porn, where porn is a subject, we have to expect a fair amount of nudity and a fair amount of at least, semi-sex projected on screen. And I mean, I don't know, if you're going to see a film or if you sit down to watch a film called Hardcore and you're shocked that there's sex in it, what did you expect to see?
And I'm wondering now. I'm trying to think back of one. Obviously, we're bringing our own biases into the movie as everyone does. But I'm trying to think back. I don't recall a scene where there's really anything. Like, you don't ever see someone strung out. You don't see someone. You see the violent porn, but it's never given to the sense that it's not consensual. And she's clearly not being harmed. It's just titillation, and where you see Scott's reaction, which is horrified, but at no point do you see even his daughter as being treated poorly. Right. I mean, you see her having sex, but you don't ever see her being beaten. You don't ever see her strung out on drugs. Now, they do make some allusions to that she was given drugs, and that because there was some like the person who's kind of her handler there's talk about how when he's trying to find this particular person, that talks about how he potentially could be giving her drugs to get. Yeah. But when he finds her, it clearly this is her choice. I am here because these people have accepted me. These people have shown me love. These people have given me something that you clearly haven't given. Yeah.
But I mean, none of the sex is ever right. It's never. I mean, however you want to define gratuitous, but it's never anything that seems, at least with the daughter, overly violent. And not forced at all. She seems to be a willing, a wanting participant, right? She's there in charge. And even one of the guys says, like, oh, she's crazy. Like, she was like too sort of like energetic and too excited about this. When he finally finds her at the bar, I mean, she's upset to see him. She does not, and not in a like, oh my God, I'm embarrassed and I'm like ashamed, but like, get away from me. Like, I don't want to go back with you. So I think, I mean, have you ever seen the French film Baise-moi?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, there's a film where I think Peter Travers, I could be wrong, but described it as Thelma and Louise with actual penetration, which I thought was, but again, like if you're going into a film like that and you're not expecting to see the act, then what did you think you were going to see?
Especially when you know what it translates to.
Right. That was. Have you read the novel? I haven't read the novel.
I have not. No.
The New York Review of Books did. This was like last year, a couple years ago. You said this word
books. What does that mean?
I know this is a film podcast, but I like words. New York Review of Books did a kind of extended piece on Virginie Despentes, the writer, and her kind of, a lot of that is in some ways autobiographical.
Sure.
But I mean, really interesting but again, like her take and her ideas and experience of sex are vastly different than depicted here in Hardcore.
Mm-hmm. So thumbs up, thumbs down. You liked it?
Hardcore?
Yeah.
No, I liked it. I mean, I think that there's some things that are left wanting, but I think overall, and like I said, I think it's an interesting progression from Blue Collar to this, and how Schrader is, I think, really starting to figure out what he wants these films to be. And I think even if you like forecast into the future, that Boyle character is gone, right?
Sure.
So if you look at some of the films later, everybody has a little bit more of that flat, effectless thing that he's going for, that he wants to go for. You know, the Boyle character is not in Light Sleeper, right? Not in First Reform, not in Card Counter, right? And everybody is much more flat on purpose. And so I think he's figuring that out in this film. And yeah, no, I like that it's not quote unquote plot heavy, because I don't really.
Yeah, no, this seems like an autobiographical film for him, right? Yeah. I mean, this feels like him finding. He's both sides of the coin in this story, and it looked at like that. It really is a snapshot of his career that I think is really.
Yeah. I don't think you could have American Gigolo without this.
Oh, I agree.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I think totally he was like getting his footing and then found it.
So on to American Gigolo, the iconic 80s Richard Gere film.
Neo-noir? Do we call it that?
Yeah. So American Gigolo is about Richard Gere. He is the American Gigolo. He is a man for hire. He performs a whole bevy of acts for different, usually older women, wealthy women. He obviously sleeps with them for money. He is kind of a free agent in the sense that he works for a couple of different pimps. He is very wealthy. He's very, very good at what he does. And he kind of plays things kind of fast and loose, and where like I said, he plays pimps against one another. He takes his own jobs. That disturbs both of the pimps, but he doesn't seem to care. He's very, very good at what he does. He finds himself coming across a young woman who he typically does not engage with because he only likes to deal with younger women. Older women. Sorry. And so he finds this younger woman. He starts to find himself having feelings for this woman, and it kind of creates a conflict in his life. During this time, he's set up by one of his pimps to go and cuckold this rich man and his wife. Ultimately, that rich man and his wife ends up turning up dead. And Richard Gere gets framed for the murder, and then it's him trying to essentially prove his innocence, and he tries to go back to the class of people and the people that he worked with in the past to help him out, provide him alibis, provide him money and the ability to escape this persecution. They all at this point want to have nothing to do with him, and so it's his story of trying to free himself from this crime that everyone thinks that he's done, that he hasn't done. And that's the synopsis of the film.
Yeah, Richard Gere as Julian Kay he's so much like a man about town. Right? So like for one woman, he goes antiquing with her. Right? And yes, the implication is later that they have sex or whatever, but he's there as this kind of confidant to go antiquing with and to
he provides a service. He provides more than just sex, right? He's gone beyond just, yes, he does have sex and he does satisfy these women, but it's not just in the bedroom. He befriends them. He provides them with company. Of
a kind that they haven't had.
Right. He understands their needs beyond their sexual desires, and that's what ultimately has made him so successful.
Yeah. And this is where I think that he and this goes back to this like spectacle and illusion thing that he buys into, that he thinks that by knowing 6 languages and being able to
studying a 7th, right?
Yeah, studying a 7th, working on Swedish, right? And being able to look at antique chest of drawers and seeing if they've been sort of, worked on or tampered with, and being able to sort of establish their value. He thinks that is going to some way kind of like buy him entry into this glamorous world where he doesn't realize that all he is a rented thing.
Right, and everything about him is an artifice, right? He has everything. All the trappings, so he uses his money to buy all the trappings of the society that he desperately wants to be part of. He has a convertible Mercedes. He has he has a wonderful apartment that overlooks the beach. He has Armani suits. He has the most up-to-date stereo system, equipment, right? So
he has paintings, right? I mean, original paintings of some kind in his apartment, right? He has original artwork. I mean, he's playing the part of a sophisticate, even if he isn't, right? He's just playing a part. And that is the thing that really gets him into trouble, because he thinks that he can sort of transcend this part. So when he goes to Nina Van Pallen of the long farewell, when he goes to her and asks for help, she's more of like the high class madam. She rejects him because she feels rejected, because Julian, Richard Gere, forgot his place.
Right, he forgot where he came from.
He forgot where he came from.
He forgot who propped him up and gave him entrance, right?
Right. Well, because then really who gave him entrance was Bill Duke. I fucking love Bill Duke.
Duke's amazing.
He's so good.
Like,
I mean, even as a director,
Bill Duke
I know.
Like,
he looked tough.
Yeah.
I mean,
like once you get like just, I forget when Predator is, but just a few years later, it's not even a decade later, he's just gigantic and jacked.
Yeah.
And now in this, he's just lithe and like,
and he's always had this kind of, I would say menacing look, but even like as the cop and menace to society,
like it's just a seriousness to him that he brings to the table. Like it's like, I don't know what it is about his eyes, but like it's just, there's no shit taken, right?
No. So anytime that I mess up, I hear Bill Duke's voice from Menace to Society going, "You know you done fucked up, right? You know you done fucked up," and I'm just like, shit. But that is like stuck with me. But the way he says that is so menacing, so scary, and so like I know. And I will get you at some point. So, but that's where he came from. This guy, Leon, right? Bill Duke plays Leon, who dabbles in sort of both the straight and gay world of him.
Duke does anything. Duke is about the money. He will provide men to whatever service that people are asking of him. So if it's a man who wants to be cuckolded, he'll provide that. If it's an S&M bondage thing, if it's a gay thing, he provides all of that. Yeah. And yes, Kay got his start. Gere got his start with Duke, and has kind of branched out and moved to Beyond. He still goes back occasionally he calls in favors, right? Because that's how he ended up at that house, cuckolding the husband. Where like Leon calls him and he's like, "I need a favor," and he's like, "Oh, go ask so and so." And he's like, "Well, I can't find him." "All right, fine, I'll do it just this one time." And and he keeps going. And at the end, he goes back to that world too. And what I love is that Bill Duke says, "Don't trust these high-class people. They'll turn on you." And they do, right? And he's right. And at the end, they do. This film, can we talk about Pickpocket in conjunction with this? Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, this film is so parallel to Pickpocket. Go ahead and explain Pickpocket.
So Pickpocket
we danced around it, but we haven't actually talked to it.
So Pickpocket is Bresson's film from 1959, and it's a fairly short film.
It's an hour 16.
Hour 16, and it's essentially the making of a pickpocket. It's in some way fashioned on Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, where Michelle, our pickpocket, sort of thinks that there's a certain class of men that should be able to do whatever they want, right? Or a certain class of person that should be able to do whatever they want, because in the end, the good will outbalance the bad. And
they're above it, right? They're geniuses, and they're so good at what they do that, and Gere says this in the movie as well. Don't you think that there's people out there that we should just forgive or let do whatever they want to do, because they are our betters. Right. They're better than, and of course, both Pickpocket, both Michelle and Gere are speaking about themselves, right? I mean,
correct.
But this idea of like, why are you punishing me for doing something that essentially everybody does or wants to do?
Right.
And I just happen to be good at this thing, so I should be able to do it.
Right. And so Michelle, our pickpocket, sees a pickpocket on the metro, and he emulates that, and he gets better and better, but he kind of gets caught by somebody on the subway. Eventually, another pickpocket sees him and trains him to become a better pickpocket, or like the best pickpocket. All the while, there is a cop who has taken an interest in Michelle, and this is what's so interesting about Pickpocket, is that it does all the things that you don't expect it to do, or all the things that you expect it to do in a crime story. It just doesn't do. There's no real cat and mouse. I mean, it's a crime movie.
No, in fact, in the scene where he's supposed to be caught, you see him being followed, and you see him in the cop car. You don't actually see him being
never
caught.
seen him get caught.
And the cop almost allows him to do what he wants to do.
Right, and the film opens with Michelle stealing money right from at the racetrack, and then he gets caught. And you never see him get caught. You just see him then in the cop car. And in the end, the cop's like, "Well, I can't prove it, so you can go." And then, there's this sort of following, but letting him do sort of whatever he wants until at a certain point, They just don't. And then, because you get the feeling that Michelle wants to be caught at this point for some reason. It never really. But again, this is what part of the brilliance, I think, of this film is that everything is so flat that we have no idea why Michelle wants to get caught. We have no idea why Michelle won't go see his mother. I mean, we understand because he stole money from her, but there's something else there too. But we get to bring all that stuff to it, right? We get to sort of supply that emotion because there's no emotion for us.
Almost to a desperation, right? While you're watching this movie, you're like, somebody hug somebody, somebody do something with your face, smile, frown, cry.
But
it's nothing. And I forget the girl's name in Pickpocket, but
her name's Jean. The character's name is Jean.
Right. Yeah. And so those two together, they're just, I wouldn't say monotone because that's doing that a disservice, but the flatness of the performances and the way that they stare at the camera or just off into the distance and give you nothing. You're just it's weirdly drawing you into this movie of like, I desperately wanted to do something.
But that's what Bresson wanted, right? And that's how he kept our attention the whole time, which is fascinating.
Because one, the action on the screen, he's not a particular the pickpocket. Like you go and watch something like Focus, that Will Smith thing, where
any kind of heist crime movie, right?
Cool,
con man movie,
tied into it.
Oh, that's so amazing! I want to do that.
This you're like, okay, he's literally just sticking his hand in someone's pocket and taking it.
I would have felt that. Like, what are you doing, right? Like, I wear watches. That's not going to happen. I'm sorry.
Right. Like everything about it, you're just like, there's nothing overly engaging about this, but it is mesmerizing. Yeah, it's
such a cool trick that Bresson does, and he does this in all of his films, right? Where that flat, affectless sort of approach makes us pay attention, and we become really active filmmakers at that point. We're making meaning as we're watching, right? We are so engaged because we're so annoyed, right? Or because we're forced to be. But that's what then allows the ending to be such a kind of surprise and jump, because there's one moment in that film where Michelle shows emotion, and it's at the end. And it's, I think, I think somewhere it was said that Bresson wanted to make us jump, and that's how he made us jump at the end, right? It's not a scare, but it's a surprise.
But then it ends. Yeah. Like the one moment of elation that you get, the one kind of internal relief that you're allowed, and then the movie cuts to black.
Of course.
And you're left with like this longing for this film to go on, to see this story play out.
But this is part of what's called, this is a technical term that I use in writing, right? It's called the double oomph ending. It's so technical. But it's that a good ending should surprise us twice, right? So in this film, the surprise is, whoa, this emotion. Right? And it's like, where did that come from? Okay, that's a surprise. But then like this second surprise should allow us to kind of reconsider the work from the beginning and make us rethink kind of what we just saw or read.
Right.
And I think that it's such a subtle way to do that, because we are sitting there going, okay, wait, what just happened? What did I just watch? How does all this kind of go back on each other? Right. And it's just brilliant.
Yeah.
And it's such a short film. And this plays, this is Schrader kind of, it's a direct homage.
Yeah.
And he says as much. So the French film critic Serge Denis, he wrote about American Gigolo, and he's like, look, clearly this is Schrader doing Bresson doing Pickpocket, but he says, for this to really be done right, a la Bresson, this would have to be a hardcore porno.
Yeah.
Right? Because we barely see sex.
Because his crime is the gigolo part, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. His crime, his becoming a pickpocket, we watch it, right? We watch it. We watch him become that.
And the sex scene, there's titillation, right? You see naked girls.
Sure.
But the sex scene that he does have, the one that we see with Lauren Hutton, is filmed just like it would appear in Pickpocket.
Right.
You see her face. You see these like odd close-ups. There's no emotion at all during the sex. It's just very rote. It's very passionless. And so that whole section, you're right. I mean, there's nothing to that scene whatsoever, which makes the casting perfect, because had they casted, like, I know Lauren Hutton wasn't the first choice, and
neither was Richard Gere.
Right. And I'll get to that in a little bit, but like her in this scene and the kind of almost lack of chemistry that those two had played so well to what he was trying to accomplish, which I know sounds counterintuitive to filmmaking completely.
But that's back to Bresson, that everything that we think of as a film, Bresson was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not cutting where you think I should cut. Right. I'm going to cut somewhere else. I'm going to make you sit there for a minute and stare at this door before it opens. Right? Or I'm not going to show you this chase and the crime. Right. I'm just going to show you this. I'm not going to show you emotion or chemistry between these two actors. And that's what I think. Yeah, Schrader gets at and does well in that.
He does well. I don't think he completely pulls it off. And I think studio interference probably would not have allowed him to completely cut it on a downer note or not on a not happy ending or where Kay is.
But I think he wanted to that.
I 100% agree. Yeah. I think had he been given final cut or whatever, and maybe he had it, and maybe who knows what happened at the end of the day. But I think that he does pull back and go American a little bit more than obviously what Kazan would have.
I mean, Schrader's not French. But these sex scenes, back to this sex scene and how it really does sort of mirror and emulate Bresson there too, where it's all synecdoche, it's all parts, right? It's all metonymy, where we understand that they're having sex because we see their legs in a certain way or we see their hands in a certain way, but we just never see the act. And I think if this were like Bresson, you'd have to see the actual act, because instead sex is just a theme in the film. It's not like an actual thing. Like
even the nudity, even Gere's nudity is presented as a matter of fact more than it is titillation. Yeah. I mean, it's surprising because it just doesn't happen that often, especially in 1980.
That was like one of the first major actor doing full frontal nudity.
I can't think of another one that wouldn't have been just somebody in the. I mean, it happens way more often now, thanks to Ewan McGregor, and he taking his dick out in every movie. But yeah, this would have been. I mean, I would have, and again, probably what led to a lot of the box office success of this movie was seeing Gere all natural. But I mean, and again. But nothing. It's shocking in a sense that it just didn't happen very often. But it wasn't shocking in the sense where you weren't. It just happened. Like he just walks to his window and is looking out the window and has a soliloquy. Yeah. But that's really about it.
But I think some of. And just to make sure we're clear, I like this film. I think this is a good movie. I think it's a really good movie. But I think some of what held Schrader back in Hardcore also held him back here. I think he's looser and more willing to sort of engage with this theme or this subject matter, but he's still kind of like, I'm not sure how close to get in there, especially because everything else is so flat and affectless that he's not letting some of this other stuff do the work of filling in there.
I think that methodology tied to this film holds it back a little bit more than it needs to. Yeah. I think, again, and talking about, I'm trying to have your cake and eat it too, having this thriller that of Gere trying to get out of a murder mystery and trying to figure out who's setting him up and trying to evade the police doesn't play as well with this, emotionless core.
Right.
So I think to me, of the three films, this is probably my least. I liked it. It's probably my least favorite. It's the one that I think I can talk about the most. But I think ultimately, having that pullback of the emotional investment of this movie harms it in a way where once Gere gets to the conclusion, that it's Duke that set him up, and Duke set him up because, hey man, I don't like you.
Yeah,
there's no good reason for it.
Needed somebody.
I needed somebody.
I needed a fall guy.
And I never really liked you, man. It's a cool way to do it. But there's so much that happens in between then where he has to find the jewels that are planted under his car. So there's a lot that happens. Like it almost needed to be cut down and shortened quite a bit, where you didn't have, where it was just, everything was just, again, more matter of fact.
Yeah.
And rather than it being, okay, we're trying to do this thriller, but also trying to do it in a sense where we're trying to evoke.
He was really trying to do Bresson. He was really trying to, I mean, down to the crime story, right? Where we never see the cop just sort of pops up and says, hi, I've been watching you. I'm going to get you. I mean, in the same thing.
Elizondo's great in this.
Yeah, because he's doing that same role, right? Where he just walks up. Yeah. He's like, what do you think of my new suit?
Yeah, he's smug about it.
So good.
Hector completely understands Kay throughout the entire film. He has the button on the entire time. Yeah. That's the one thing that's happening here that I don't think happens in Pickpocket, is that the outer forces around Gear's character are constantly ping-ponging him around. They know how to manipulate him.
Yeah.
They ignore him when they need to ignore him. They use him when they need to use him. They'll turn him, they'll make him pretend that he's gay when they need, and everybody, the high society, the low society, the cops, they're playing him for the fool. In fact, almost all of them know he didn't do this. They don't give a shit. Somebody's got to go down. Fine. Fuck it. Let him be that guy because we don't care about it. He doesn't exist.
Right. Again, he's forgotten what his station was or is supposed to be.
Right. And now he's a part of no world whatsoever. He never made it to high society. Now he's no longer welcome in low society. And the cop is willing to twist the screws, and Hector doesn't even really care if he did it or not.
Yeah.
All they want to do is find somebody to pin the murder on.
Yeah.
Just like everybody else.
It's just like in The Wire, right? You just got to close the cases, right? Turn
right.
Turn the red names to black or whatever.
Oh, have you ever read that book? The homicide book that's based on the year of the story.
The actual David Simon. No.
Yes.
No.
That is eye-opening.
Because The Wire is depressing enough in terms of how systems actually work, and so.
Yeah. No. The whole thing is about he took a year and spent kind of just entrenched with the Baltimore.
Because he was trained as a journalist. He wasn't a journalist. Yeah.
And that's basically it. They talk about one case that goes through that they never close, but it's just them getting the red ball and trying to close it out. It's depressing as fuck. But
hey, this is I don't know what you mean. I think that our systems of power and our systems are good. There's nothing wrong with them. They all work exactly how they're supposed to work, right?
Right.
Which maybe that was more truthful than I think it really was meant to be.
Back to blue collar.
Yeah, right.
What I love about the cop, and again, what I love about Hector Elizondo's character is that he does take Gear's advice. Gear gives him such a hard time at the beginning about what's your posture doing? What's with this suit?
Stand
what are you doing?
Get better clothes.
What is this body? What's your body doing?
Exercise.
What is this like? Yeah, it's like, you don't got to do a lot. But by the end of the movie, when he finally busts him, he's actually in an Armani suit. Yeah. He's put together. He looks good. It's so funny. It's such a fuck you to Gear. You know what? I could do this too, motherfucker. I could do this. What you've done here is nothing. You've done nothing, and you don't even. Eventually he realizes it, right? I mean, that the whole point of Pickpocket. And the whole point, I guess I shouldn't say the whole point of Pickpocket, but the whole point for American Gigolo is that Gear does come to realize that he's not part of this high society, that it's completely forgotten him, and it even knows that he exists. He's not pulling one over. The women that he's sleeping with, their husbands know about it. They don't care. They're rich. They don't care. They're having their own affairs on the other side as well. He's not even a thorn in their side.
He's disposable.
Right. And so he goes home and he tears up all of his things. He goes home and he's looking for, he's supposedly looking for the jewels, but he goes home and he tears apart his Mercedes. He tears apart his stereo equipment. He tears apart all these this expensive pottery in his house, completely tears it apart because he comes to realize that
it's all bullshit.
None of it mattered. His whole entire life, his whole entire philosophy has been built on lies and it's all bullshit.
It's just a construct. It is just a spectacle that he has bought into, and he's bought into the spectacle of himself.
And of course, and this saving grace of Kay and the saving grace of is the one woman that he's kind of allowed himself to fall in love with and has fallen in love with him. So that's the through line of the movie that kind of redeems him at the end, is that he had never let himself be with younger women or to fall in love with women, because he saw no challenge in it, right? There was there was nothing. It wasn't like learning a language. It wasn't like satisfying an older woman who's been around the block. Younger woman, he knew how to have sex. He knew how to give somebody an orgasm. Right. Giving an orgasm was the easiest thing that he could possibly
do. Except for the one woman that took 3 hours.
Right. But again, that was work.
But he was like, oh, I got such a challenge and satisfaction out of that.
Right.
Because he doesn't know how to receive pleasure.
Right.
He doesn't know how to,
that's why Laura Hutton, is reluctant, is because she doesn't believe that she can give a gigolo the pleasure that he would want, or that she wants to be able to give to her lover.
Well, and she even says at one point, she's like, I don't want to make love. And then she says later, I always want to fuck you. But here's the thing, when we do, you're at work.
Right.
You're working. It's not this kind of thing back and forth. It's not a mutual sort of, traipse of pleasure. It's just you're at work and you have a job to do. She's like, fuck that, man. So Lauren Hutton wasn't supposed to be
I think it was Jessica Lange, right? It was she came in and came out, and then and eventually when she got signed, when she was able to come back, it wasn't Lauren Hutton, they'd already started, I believe.
And because I think wasn't Meryl Streep at one point that would have attached, but she was like, I don't like how this is portrayed. Oh, and Julie Christie was originally cast. Really Julie Christie would have, and I'm thinking of Don't Look Back, right? Was that what it was called?
Don't Look Now.
Don't Look Now.
Yeah,
Sorry.
with Donald Sutherland.
The Nicholas Rogues. And Travolta was supposed to be.
So let's talk Travolta a little bit. Yeah. Because I don't think he works at all in this movie.
Interesting. Okay.
I understand why you picked Travolta, because at this particular point in time,
I would never.
At this particular point in time, he's at the height of his career. He's at the height of his career. I mean, yes, he's going to be on a really bad run quickly. He's going to be staying alive. He's doing perfect. Until The Experts was that stupid movie that I was trying to tell you about a few podcasts. Oh yeah,
right.
With Ari Gross,
But he's already done Welcome Back, Kotter. So he's, in my mind, he's
right. So he's at the pinnacle of his career. So yes,
doesn't get better.
And so Travolta wanted Final Cut, and Schrader was like, no, but they were willing to pay him $2 million. So, and they end up paying Gere $35,000 plus some back end profit points. So this would have saved them a ton of money not doing Travolta. But the thing is, the reason I think Gere works better in this role is that I believe him. To me, Travolta's too angular. He's too his handsomeness is almost in his.
It works against him almost, right?
Yeah, and it's not the same. I don't know. Gere is a softer, prettier man than Travolta is. Travolta's tall and kind of gangly, especially in this time of his career.
Yeah.
And he's also just kind of brash and cocksure, and where Gere plays these roles where, yes, he can play menacing, but he's a softer, more feminine male that I think really works. And I believe him in this role way more than I would, and him ingratiating himself with older, rich women than someone like Travolta, who would stand out, who would be a presence, who would be like, Gere blends. Even though he's beautiful, Gere blends in better with this society, because also you can push him off as a plaything and as an ornamental plant, where you can't do that with Travolta. Also, no way whatsoever the nudity happens and I think the nudity is an important piece of this movie. I think it's an important piece of where filmmaking was at that particular point in time, and that Gere was very brave to do it. And I don't think it happens with Travolta. I don't think Travolta has that.
And I don't think that was in the script either. I think that was all Gere. But I do think that it says exactly what it's supposed to say about his character, Julian Kay. That's what he would do. There is no sort of shame. There is no kind of, I'm not. It's just this unabashed, this is what it is.
This is who I, you be naked too. There's no judgment on bodies. Right. I'm here to please you. So if you he makes his body, athletic but not overly. The athletic equipment that really just didn't make it past the 80s, but and I don't know why. Why aren't we all just doing gravity boots?
Gravity boots and shoulder turns. That's it, right?
Yes. It's just.
I never see the guy do a push-up.
But he is there. His entire being is to complement his clients.
Yeah. Well, and it's a tool.
Yes.
That's how he looks at it, right? It's just a literal tool.
Right.
It's a thing that gets the job done. Do you know that Big Daddy Kane song, I Get the Job Done?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Because he works, right?
Right.
Sorry. Anytime we can drop in Big Daddy Kane. But I also, back to the Travolta thing, I think you're right. I think he's too arrogant, too cocksure. Gere has something else in his eyes, and it can be soft, but it can also be this kind of cunning, conniving. You always think, so Gere in any role that he's in, but especially as Julian Kay, I see him walking into a room and knowing exactly, right, who he can con, who he can get a drink from, who wants to go home with him, and where all the exits are. That's the kind of vibe he gives off, and without doing very much work at all.
And Travolta's vibe is
everyone look at me.
Right. I'm big and stupid and I don't care about anybody else. You're going to look at me because I know I'm good looking and I'm going to command the room, so I don't have to do any work. Like Gere is the guy, he's the guy in the background who is pulling all of the strings. He does this so well in a lot of films. He was Infernal Affairs. He does it really well. He's really, I mean, Primal Fear is probably the best example. But like throughout his career, I mean, he can definitely play vulnerable and play funny. An
Officer and a Gentleman is what, a couple years later?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple years after this.
Which I think probably Travolta turned down as well. Like
I think so too.
He was one of those guys that was always picking up Travolta's things that
before this, Gere had done Days of Heaven.
He had done Days of Heaven and Looking for Mr. Goodbar.
Right. And
that was basically it.
And that was it. But I think this role works because of Mr. Goodbar.
Yes.
Right? I mean, definitely. I mean, you can see how that goes here and how he works so well in this role. I mean, obviously they're different, but
yeah. Also, another person who turned this down was Christopher Reeve, who I think he would have been brilliant in this movie. And Reeve's career and what he chose and what he didn't choose, he was up for I mean, this is obviously before the accident, but he was up for like Lethal Weapon and a lot of different things that like he could have done that he just turned down. But I just recently watched him. I just streamed Death Trap recently for the Real House Foundation at Home Film Fest, and he's so good in that. He's so like, you know, he takes on so many different personas in that movie, and he's just so like, for me, he has the same kind of quality that Gere has, but splits the difference between Travolta and Gere, where Reeve was this burly, masculine, beautiful man, but could also kind of, obviously with this Clark Kent persona, could underplay it a little bit. I think the role would have been completely different. I still don't think the nudity would have been there, but I think Reeves would have been really good in this role. Yeah. To me, this is like the quintessential, like when you think of movies in the 80s and you're not thinking of John Hughes and teenage comedies, this is the movie that you think of. Like, I don't know of any other movie. The poster was iconic. And to the one of the things that this movie captures at the cusp, at the very beginning of 1980 is that 80s aesthetic so very well. I couldn't think of another movie who did this well, where you had this kind of dark neon, like you said, the neo-noir, but like the neon and the Beverly Hills aspect of it. Yeah, the Debbie Harry, the different versions of the Debbie Harry song "Call Me," and like the musical version.
Blondie is a band.
Yeah, whatever. Man.
Speaking of T-shirts,
right? Yes, yeah. Thank you.
Blondie is a band.
That was really well done. The
Armani, the sort of catapulting Armani into the. So this is a question like, how much did Schrader like almost invent this?
Right. I mean, like predates Miami Vice. Like, this predates Michael Mann stuff. I mean, like it's just like
he put this into. He almost like helped create the culture.
Right.
With something like this.
And because at this point. Even looking back on it, it doesn't. You see it, but it hasn't become a parody of itself yet. You see the puffy shoulders, you see the slim suits, but it's not this garish white suited, bright T-shirt underneath, no socks, shoes kind of thing. He's still a classy. He still dresses classy. He understands fashion, but. Really, I can't think of any other film that does this well. And maybe it's because the aesthetic is not.
But it holds up so well. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah. So even because just rewatched it like last weekend, and I'm like, this holds up. Like I'm not laughing at any of this fashion. No. I'm not laughing at anything that they're doing or talking about or how they're doing it, because it just seems so. I think one reason that is because he creates this world so well, right? That this really is of a place and of a time. I mean, very much like Blue Collar, but so nothing feels anachronistic.
Yeah.
Even as you're watching it, how many 40 years or whatever later.
Yeah, and you can't really point to any of it. You can point and say that this was made in the 80s.
Sure.
You can't point and say that the hairstyles and it just wasn't. I don't know.
But how many references do films make and like they just don't work now? Like 40 years.
Right.
That doesn't happen here.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing.
Right.
But we know Blondie because it's a band, and we know Armani. Right, and that Mercedes is iconic as well. And so I think like those kind of key points, right? And this world, I mean, sex is still a prevalent theme in everything. So
yeah, he does touch a little bit, when Gere goes to the gay club, there's a little bit of that. And again, even that, which you saw with the kind of the bondage and the leather, which would be referenced in things like Police Academy and For Laughs and Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and those types of movies. But again, here they are, again, it's played pretty straight. It's played as unassuming. This is just a place that Gere had to go to find some information.
This is another part of that world.
Right.
And it belongs in this world. And so it doesn't seem out of place or weird.
What I find intriguing is the murder. Like, it takes a minute for this movie to, like, you have to kind of work to figure out what happened, right? Because that Gere was with the cuckolded husband, and that he had sex with his wife, and the husband was like telling him to slap her around and do. But when you get back to, like, it takes a minute to figure out, oh, there was another session where she was because Gere handcuffed her, and so it does play an interesting, like, we're just trying to figure out, okay, what the fuck is going on, and like, why are they thinking it? Like, what happened? Because like, we saw that and it was innocuous, and like, how did she end up dying?
But this is like the other thing that I think, as a callback to Bresson, we don't see the act. Right? We never see the murder. Right? We don't see. All we see is a headline. In fact, in a newspaper.
Right. And he's like looking over it, and he's like eating lunch or whatever.
And then we get sort of like the repercussions. But I think that's also Schrader saying it doesn't matter, right? And even the cops and everyone else, like, doesn't matter who did it or if you did it or what happened. What matters is that we're going to sort of put you away for it.
Right.
And so I think it's like, but so it's like we do kind of have to. Well, I think it's like we're almost like waiting for this. Okay, if we haven't seen this film before, we're thinking, is this just a movie about this guy like laying out his clothes and sleeping with women? Is that all we're doing here? And then that kind of crime aspect comes in. But again, like, that's not even the point, is it?
Yeah, and I mean, if he had have ended this with Lauren Hutton not saving him, not giving him the alibi, and not kind of like providing him an out here, I think that would have been just as a delicious outcome.
Yeah.
If Kay ends up in jail for this and goes down for this, and they tack on Duke's murder as well, or Duke's death as well, that's a delicious ending to this movie. Now, it's definitely a downer. Do I think it's the iconic I love the 80s American Gigolo that we all think about? Although I think a lot of people think of this movie who actually haven't really seen it.
Right.
I think they misremember it, or they haven't actually seen it because they
assume it's something it's not.
Right. It's like the Scarface poster to the extent of like where it is just so omnipotent that it's everywhere, right? I mean, it's omnipotent, is a word, but we don't say it. Is that that American Gigolo?
It's all powerful.
It's all seeing. But yeah, it doesn't, like, when you think about this movie, I think people think about it in different terms. You think about the sexiness of it, but again, that sexiness is not really there. You think about the thriller aspect of it, which the thriller aspect is not really there. I think, like you said with Bresson, you put all this shit, you bring all this shit to the table, and you think about it. Like, if you see Pickpocket, you're describing it to someone, you're going to describe it as probably a pretty exciting fucking movie.
Yes. When
in reality, and it is in its own way, but it is not in the same way that you normally would think of exciting. Like, I would highly recommend anyone listening to this to go watch Pickpocket. It is brilliant, but you're going to walk away from it going, especially the first time you see it, like, what the fuck did I just watch? And that's what was intended. I think I think for a moneymaker and for a big blockbuster type movie this wasn't a huge, it was a hit. It wasn't a huge hit. I mean, this came out, 80? So it would have been like it was probably the top 25 movies of the year. It comes under some Cheech and Chong film, and then but it grew legs. But it definitely has legs for sure. It is definitely in the zeitgeist as far as things you remember from the 80s.
Oh yeah. And I think back to sort of like the idea of how people, misremember or kind of put upon like an actual plot. I mean, this is a vibes movie. It really is.
Yeah, of course.
And this again, goes back to, I know that I've said this before about Schrader, but this is him just kind of letting things go. Right? Instead of having this really neat structured plot, he makes airy films. He makes these films that sort of run on vibes and mood, right? Which I prefer, to be honest. So,
right. No, absolutely.
I mean, I like things that have a sense of poeticism and a sense of sort of lyricism, even though I hate the word lyricism. but there's no better way to sort of, I think, say it. So I really like that. And that's one reason I mean, even on like a second rewatching, it's like, yeah, this is really kind of cool.
Yeah, I definitely think it holds up more than those what you would consider iconic 80s films as far as rewatchability goes. I definitely would return to this one more often than I would, because again, there's more to uncover. There's more to find out about this film than there is, say, something like a Lethal Weapon or, something sort of generic action flick that kind of falls into line with this in the same way. Let's get to our recommended if you likes.
Yeah. And so I texted you and said that I was approaching this as like a double feature sort of idea. Okay. Right. So I'm going to start with Blue Collar, and what I paired it with was Car Wash from 1976, the Michael Schultz directed film written by Joel Schumacher. But this is a similar take.
Sure.
On these are employees of a car wash, right? It's a day in the life of, and we sort of follow their hopes and their dreams and their trials and tribulations throughout the day.
Yeah, but it's plotless. I mean,
but it's great because it's funny, but it's also serious. I mean, you have serious issues at work here of class, of race, right? Of the idea of work. A lot of the same themes that are touched on with Blue Collar, but it's got much more sort of levity. I mean, the scene where the two guys who are like, practicing their dance moves as they're watching, it's so good. And the Applejack hats, I love a good Applejack hat. Right? Also, Bill Duke is in this as well.
Right.
And Richard Pryor. So that's what I would pair. That's what I paired Blue Collar with, was Car Wash.
I was going to go with Bone, Leonard Cohen's first film with Yaphet Kotto, but since we'd already talked about that, I went with Elia Kazan's On the Waterfront.
Okay.
Which is a similar kind of themed film about, if you haven't seen it, I don't know why you're listening to this podcast. Stop the fucking podcast and put on the Waterfront. That is one of the American classics. Brando is it's one of those things.
Brando.
It's peak Brando, but it's also... It's hard as from a cinephile perspective, when you show people movies that are like seminal, right? Mm-hmm. It's hard to explain why they are seminal when you see everything that's come beyond it, right? If you've watched every 90s and 2000 movie, like you're going to pick up on things like, oh, well, that's what Brando was doing and the way that he was acting and the way that he was delivering dialogue just hadn't been fucking done. This man was a genius. So anyway, the movie is about Brando's character. He is a former boxer who's tied up in this dock workers union, who is there just basically their big heavy. And it's essentially he finds out that he's being fucked from both sides as well. He starts to fall in love with a sister of a person who he led the union to who they threw off of a roof. He starts to fall in love with her, and as he starts to fall in love with her, basically all sides of his life fall apart. He starts to run afoul of his mafia friends. He starts to run afoul of the girl and his work life, and he realizes that he's just been a big dumb mutt his entire life, and that he's not smart enough to get out of it, and the people that he loved and tried to take care of him weren't there when they had his back. And that's it's the whole, I could have been a contender, I could have been somebody, and I know that's been parodied over and over again, but when you watch it at its source in this beautiful black and white film, it is just so well done. Similar themes, but again, it's kind of a cheat for me to pull like On the Waterfront out, but that's that was what I thought about.
That's how this works. I mean, that's the idea of this, is that like these films make us think of this other film, and who the fuck cares why? I mean, like we can get there, and that's all that matters as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so for hardcore, this is an obvious one. And I just picked 8mm.
Okay.
Right.
All right.
The Joel Schumacher directed, starring Nick Cage, Joaquin Phoenix, where Nick Cage is a private eye who's been hired to investigate a snuff film. But the way that it sort of delves into the seedier part of porn, the way that I think that there are similar themes and even similar sort of like acting traits from Cage and George C. Scott in this film, how he's covering his face and not wanting to look, and how he is a kind of a fish out of water. Right. Joaquin Phoenix might as well be Nicky. Right. Sort of like following him or leading him around this world. So, that's what I did.
I chose 1970s Joe, starring Peter Boyle.
Okay.
Which is not necessarily it's kind of a similar outrage film. So Peter Boyle plays this kind of conservative blue collar worker who is drinking in this bar one night when he comes across this kind of a richer, also a conservative guy, and they start talking about how much they hate the hippies, and he confesses to him that he had killed his daughter, who was played by Susan Sarandon, and he killed her drug dealer boyfriend. And then it becomes this really terrible joining of two bigoted minds who just kind of feed upon one another and go on kind of a killing spree on when they're trying to find Susan Sarandon as she's run away when she finds out her father has killed her boyfriend. And so it's just this really very extreme right-wing violent movie where Joe and this other kind of kind of a white-collar guy fall in line and start, it's a lot of racial slurs being thrown around. It's very hard to watch. And it's really it's an intriguing film that probably should be brought up more today as a white privilege kind of, example. But speaking back to Peter Boyle's acting career, he was so appalled by the violence in this movie and how it was people actually championed it and were excited about it that he kind of swore off violent films for a good long while. He turned down The French Connection. He was going to be Gene Hackman's role in The French Connection. He turned that down because he just couldn't stomach knowing that one of his roles was encouraging these types of people to commit acts of violence against people. It is a harrowing watch. I watched it way too young, but I think it's an important film, and it's an interesting kind of contrast to hardcore and another where it's just these people who feel like they're better than others and above these other things that happen. And, there's a lot of classism in this and a lot of misunderstanding of welfare and a lot of what you see still to this day. But
right. I was going to say, yeah,
it's So Joe.
Yeah. Keep America beautiful.
Yeah. Keep America beautiful.
I just want to give a shout out to the Friends of Eddie Coyle.
Yes.
I love that movie. Peter Boyle is also in that. Okay, so American Gigolo, since you talked about Travolta, I picked Blowout.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
That was 81. Brian De Palma. This is Travolta as a sound editor who's out one night getting field recordings and basically records evidence that an accident was actually a murder. And then John Lithgow brings all hell. Nancy Allen's in it as well. But one of those films that is a paranoia film that was what year was Parallax for you?
79.
Right, but around this time, right? I mean, early 80s, late 70s, everything was about some kind of paranoia or about Vietnam.
Yeah, it was
or
Cold
about
War. It was Cold War
paranoia. It was coming out of Vietnam. It was sort of exploitation and paranoia in the U.S.
Right, and you've got all the Nixon scandal happening as well. So
right,
it's just all very, and we're leading into this idea of total destruction of nuclear.
Right, but I find Blowout to have a similar kind of sexiness to it as well, as most De Palma is going to have anyway. Right, that kind of psychosexual.
It's lurid Hitchcock.
Right, yeah. And so I think that pairs well with American Gigolo.
Mine is Gus Van Sant's My Own Private Idaho. Nice. So he's taking the kind of the Gigolo portion of it and then pushing it out into what would become, I don't necessarily know if My Own Private Idaho is a seminal film or an iconic film for the 90s in the same way that it defines the aesthetic, but it certainly defined American independent cinema for a minute anyway. And it hit upon, it's starring Keanu Reeves and River Phoenix, and River Phoenix is this narcoleptic gigolo who's traipsing around, the United States, trying to live from, one moment to the next, and its next paycheck to the next. And Keanu Reeves is his partner, and they go around and they have all these adventures. It's a wonderful film if you haven't seen it. It is a tragedy that River Phoenix has passed and didn't get to fulfill whatever promises that he wanted to make in his life, but it really is just a wonderful, and it's like one of those movies that if you consider yourself a cinephile or a film lover, this movie is one you need to see.
Yeah, and I hope you all have the B-52 stuck in your head as well. So I did one for Pickpocket too. Did you do one for Pickpocket?
I did not do for Pickpocket.
I did.
We'll just let that be.
I did Christopher Nolan's Following.
Okay. I'm a fan.
Yeah, right. And
I saw that in the Inwood at one point, at a midnight screening. It was so much fun.
I did not. I found it.
It wasn't when it originally came out. This was after Memento. So they were doing a repertory screening of it at some point.
Because I saw Memento first in the theaters. I went and saw it twice, and I took a friend of mine, and she was like, "Do you always see movies like this?" And I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Yeah, I do." And she's like, "I don't think I'm going to go again." But so after seeing Memento, I'm like, "Who is this guy? Like, what's the story here?" And then I found Following, and but it's a story about a writer looking for material. So he follows people and becomes kind of like a serial burglar until a real burglar kind of takes him under his wing, and then kind of goes from there.
In the Nolan style, it is all about the editing. It basically takes the beginning, the middle, and the end, chops it up into different sections, and you bounce back between all three of them. There's actually weirdly enough, and I don't know why you would actually do this, but there's like linear cuts of Following and Memento, and I'm like, you're missing the point. Like, why would you do
that? It ruins everything.
Right.
There was a video of him describing how Memento worked as like a hairpin shaped narrative.
Yeah.
And it was wild. I was just like, what?
I was blown away. The first time I saw Memento in the theater, I was just like, holy fuck, this is it. This is so fucking good.
Yeah, no, I went like the next day. I went again the next day.
So it was showing at the Dolby Theater in Austin, which is like if you know what, it was an art house theater in a dorm room. Yeah, it was like there was a mall underneath a dorm, in UT, and it showed like Reservoir Dogs, and it played a Memento. I was living here, and then I drove back down like a weekend later to go see it again. And I was just like, because it wasn't showing in Dallas yet, and I was just like, I'm gonna take some friends and we're gonna go. Yeah. Like it was so good.
I saw it at a place called Castleton Arts in Indianapolis, on the north side of Indianapolis. They showed like the more mainstream like art house films, and so like this and Amelie, but they would have like a yearly kind of Hitchcock mini marathon and stuff too. So, but yeah, I saw it there, and then the next day.
Before we leave, bouncing back, I know I mentioned it, and I completely forgot the T-shirt game in hardcore is pretty on point as well. Nikki wears a Roar 713, which is a Quaalude shirt, which I've actually found one that I want to buy.
Oh, nice.
And then she has this shirt that has Sniff on it, where the eye is dotted with a musical note, and I can't find that one anywhere. I've seen the picture of it, but it's her, and it just says Sniff in like this really kind of like fun font, and with the musical note as the dotting of the eye, and I can't find any more information about that. But the Roar, the Quaalude shirt actually shows up in a Cheech and Chong movie as well. Okay. But yeah, it's like the original pill for the Quaalude. It's a cool looking shirt. So the Schrader aesthetic for sure is brilliant. Okay. So
I have a Mazzy Star T-shirt that is like a recreation of a shirt that Hope Sandoval wore on a small British music TV show where she played Halal in Bell's Ring. Right? And so I've got it's like just like this heart American flag like heart shirt. And so it doesn't say anything else on it.
It's just
so like
you have to know it's
so you have to know that she wore it on this show. And so I wear it out. Nobody fucking gets it because
but who cares? That's not the point.
But I know.
I'm going to buy that Big Mac shirt.
And if I ever see Hope Sandoval, she'll know. She'll just look at me like, yes, I understand.
All right, so next week the next episode we're going to be talking late Paul Schrader. Is that right?
That's right.
What do we choose? We chose First Reformed?
First Reformed, Card Counter, and then I think we should do Affliction.
Okay, because is good.
Okay, because Master Gardener won't be out yet, but I think Affliction will sort of I think prove a nice kind of antidote to those two films, because it is a little bit different, and it's one that he didn't write.
Right.
And so I think that'd be cool. Okay. So Affliction.
So if you want to play along at home, I think Card Counter's on HBO Max. I'm not sure where First Reformed is, and Affliction, who the hell knows? You may have to rent that one from Amazon Prime. Yeah. You know what? If you go to and not to pump up a website or anything, but if you go to IMDb, it does a pretty good job of showing you where it is. So I've been using that one as a placeholder for where is it streaming. And if you happen to be in the Dallas-Fort Worth area on November 30th after Thanksgiving, we're going to be showing the Coen Brothers Blood Simple. We'll be talking about it on the podcast as well, but we would love to see you out on November 30th.
And you're going to be doing what upcoming on the Real House Virtual?
So I'm going to be doing... we're going to be leaning into murder mystery movies this month for Rian Johnson's Glass Onion. And on the 17th, I am going to be hosting The Last of Sheila. I can never say that right. The Last of Sheila. And it's a really fun kind of it's like always on these like underseen murder mystery movies from the 70s. So if you want to go find out more about it at Real House Foundation on Facebook, there's an event out there. You can join us, and we would love to have you watch it with us virtually.
Any other news?
That's it.
All right. Until next time.
All right, guys.
We'll see you.
Thanks.
Bye.
You have been listening to Why Does the Wilhelm Scream with your hosts, Brock and Jason. If you liked today's episode, do us a favor and rate, review, and subscribe in whatever application you use to consume podcasts these days. You can reach us by visiting whydoesthewilhelmscream.com. If you are in the DFW area, we would love to see you at a Fort Worth Film Club event. You can learn more about those and find a full schedule at fortworthfilmclub.com. And you can learn about my foundation and how we are trying to foster the next generation of film lovers at realhousefoundation.org. That's REEL housefoundation.org. Till next time,